Thank you, Walter. Somebody at Wayne State has finally succeeded in finding a way to shut me up. By giving me such a long introduction, I've only got 5 minutes to do my presentation.
Oh, yeah, it just took 7 minutes, man.
But I have to praise Walter for his incredible stewardship of the Humanities Center. All of us have benefited from it. He must be a Renaissance man himself, just sitting here listening to all the, not only the great theories, but all the dribble that comes through here. Because truly this is a forum for open discussion. It is an open space in the middle of disciplinary compartments that are siloed from each other, and so there's very little dialogue between them. And this is the only central space. All the disciplines come like little tunnels and pour right here into the Humanities Center. And he has had the practical wherewithal to also film all of these great and dribbly talks. And you know, we can actually go and consult them. So thank you, Walter, I really appreciate it. I appreciate the presence of a couple of friends here that I've been dialoguing, particularly you know, our anthropologist, and because the way that I think I try to think, draw from different fields of study, and as Walter indicated, normally I would not be here. I mean, I'm not, I was born of a working family. I got the opportunity to go to University of California in the height of the affirmative action movement. I would have been pushed aside and thrown into a community college at one point, but I got a chance to train with some intellectuals at Berkeley. So I learned a lot, but then getting into the field of history, I find that the discipline is really tightly controlled by what they call canons and expectations and formations, etc. So I do defy that. Today I want to talk about Conquest ideologies. It's part of a larger theory that I have about the forces that have created and destroyed human society. One of them is the predatory state. Conquest ideologies a second. A third is liberated capitalism, which I just mean the liberated accumulation of wealth, not the strict Marxist definition. Unleashed individualism and misapplied technology. Today I'm going to focus on conquest ideologies, and again we realize that we're talking about concepts. Concepts are just invented ways of looking at what we think is reality. So a concept helps explain the reality that we perceive, or we think we are perceiving. A concept helps organize our understanding into the various components of that reality, and a concept allows us to change reality to the extent that we can or adjust to it. So that could be all the way from just ducking the missile to creating a revolution. And so ideologies are similar to concepts, a little bit more developed. Ideologies come in all shapes and sizes. They take many forms and work at many levels, including the interpersonal. They can both be benign and malignant, even at the same time, depending on circumstances. They provide us with our perceptions of the world on both individual and collective levels. Each individual and every society operate in a world in which multiple ideologies define reality. I would argue that we are swimming in a system of ideologies that we are aware of, or not aware of, and that define our thoughts and actions. For example, all have ideological views that reflect, we all have ideological views that reflect or contradict the social dominant values produced by the interactive hierarchies of power based on gender, age, class, social race, and culture. I'm saying that every society is organized by these hierarchies of power, in other words, invented hierarchies. It's a power structure, and that each one of them has an ideology that produces and maintains it. The ideologies that we hold justify and explain the actions we take in behalf of our own interests. That's the attraction of ideologies, is that they satisfy us so well. The most influential ideologies in shaping the course of world history are those religious and secular ideologies or movements that have been promoted by political states. The leaders of political states generate and promote ideologies that I classify as forms of conquest ideology. Somebody might say, well, that's too harsh. Some leaders promote harmonious ideology, or the ideology of the welfare state, or something positive. Why are you so negative? My negative view comes from the fact that we're dealing with political states, and political states were created by violence and are maintained by violence of all kinds, and that their ideologies justify that violence and the hierarchies within a society. Religious and secular ideologies justify the power of ruling groups over their own peoples and the making of war on others and on the earth itself. Internally, they legitimize the systems of laws and customs that are used to socially control and tax domestic populations. Externally, they explain the moral and cultural superiorities that require the subjugation of other peoples as tributaries and slaves. Conquest ideologies further transform the meaning of acts of violence into acts of paternalistic charity. So I'm kind of drawing a little thin line there that sort of merges between, hey, we have a right to conquer, versus, hey, you not only have a right to conquer and dominate, it's actually good for the victims. So there's an additional layer of meaning that emerges. Citizens are provided, for example, with good government, jobs, public safety, and spiritual salvation in terms of the religions promoted by the state. Alien populations have their deaths in a war commuted to lifetime slavery. They are safe from the devil and the tyranny of their own rulers, and their humanities are elevated by the assimilation into the true faith and true civilization. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but effective conquest ideologies implant themselves as normalized worldviews in the subject populations and organize all areas of thought and action in the society. You can, for example, someone has written a book on the racial state, and the argument there is that the modern state could not exist without racial values that organizes various dimensions. Someone could write a book on the gendered state. You could go and take any value in human society and figure out how does that value play into this pot of ideologies organizing human society. Variations of the state level produced ideologies, and part of the thing you have to understand is that once they're produced by state level societies, those ideologies, they're expected to permeate into the lowest of classes and be taken up. And so then there's often a lot of confusion when scholars say these ideologies were held by the American people, or these ideologies belong to these people. The ideologies were produced by elites with specific agendas of domination. And then when the populace brings them up, for example, one case would be the current and perpetual occurrence of nativism in American society. There's an ideology in America that runs through our whole history that says that foreigners and aliens are toxic to our cultural and moral integrity, and therefore we have to do something about them. And so if you had a different kind of Christian ideology up at the top, you might have a kind of Christian understanding down at the bottom. But when you got political mechanisms pumping hate into the body, social body, then you have a problem. But you have all been accustomed to seeing a lot of variations of ideologies, conquest ideologies. For example, the will of God. Most people, all the way from ancient civilization, God told us to do this. God is telling us to do this. You have the divine rights of kings and lineages. Now we represent God. We're not, and we are the only receivers of God's messages. And God's message, God gives us the authority to do this. And of course, then the kings decide, well, you know what? we need the support of the commoners, so why don't we make them all the chosen people? Now you got the chosen people, and now the action of the whole group now become legitimate. It's not just internal, but now you can use the chosen people as a weapon against the unchosen people, or the people chosen for subjugation. The Promised Land is an incredible ancient sense of ideology. The Jews were guided to the land of Canaan, where apparently there were human beings living there, but God said, hey, that's your land, go ahead and take it. So that this divine chosen aspect leads to, what you have is the idea of being chosen begins in Western civilization, maybe deeper than the Israelites, but we certainly picked it up through our inherited version of Judaism and Christianity, and also our sister religion, Islam. And so you have conquest religions, major religions, who are used to justify conquest. At this point, you have to distinguish between the core ideology of those religions. The core ideology is still love. There's nothing wrong with Jesus. There is something wrong slaughtering and conquering other people in the name of Jesus to forward Jesus on them, or some other deity. So when you identify conquest Christianity, you are talking about the perversion of the real true faith, or the same thing with democracy. Those are, I would say that, for example, the chosen people, the promised land, you find that in America in an ideology called manifest destiny that actually began with the Puritans. The Puritans left England to flee religious and economic persecution and established a light on a hill where they became the moral beacon for humanity, at the same time that they tightly controlled their little societies and oppressed people and saw the wilderness as evil. And then you get that translated to manifest destiny. Oh, the savages are holding the land that belongs to us. It is our manifest destiny to move across the land from sea to shining sea and remove the Native Americans and the Mexicans and anybody else that gets in the way. That's manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is an aspect of conquest democracy. Again, like the core ideology of the great religions, democracy as a system of values is excellent. That's the best way to govern a nation or a people. But then when you conquer people in the name of democracy, you turn it into something else. You hear a lot, almost every president, I just saw on TV a blurb in which all the presidents of the United States that could be taped on TV, which doesn't go back to Washington, and they're all saying that they believe in American exceptionalism. America is an exceptional nation, and we will stand by that no matter what. That's manifest destiny and chosen people. You're very acquainted with racism, which is biological and cultural, and that's a conquest ideology that permeates. One of the most enduring one, of course, is the class systems that organize all our societies. Did God really say that as soon as you gain a little bit of energy, the 1% has to take over and create a 99%? Or could humanity have gone on without these structured societies? For example, look at the great civilizations. How did they arise? Would have the people of Egypt, given their abundance of soils given to them by the Nile, or other peoples with abundant resources through agriculture, would it have been the choice of the common people to build the pyramids? Is that what they wanted? The common people said, hey, we got so much abundant energy, let's go force the king to build a pyramid because we want to crack our bones and die early building pyramids. So there is a class system that exists there. Another conquest ideology is what I would call enlightened reason and science. Reason and science are methods, but they've been perverted to justify all kinds of bad things. Modernization and progress, those are conquest ideologies. The idea that if we could keep producing material goods, that is progress. The American idea that our economy must keep growing forever, that's a perpetual motion machine that ultimately has to collapse, and in the meantime is sucking up the energy of the earth. That's a conquest ideology. And what happens is that in that form, the 1%, and I do believe in a historical 1%. I believe that there's always been a number of greedy individuals in society that are probably genetic 1%ers. They're ambitious, they want to control, they violate the ethic of giving, and as soon as there's surplus energy in a society, they seize it and they begin to promote their own interests. So the 1% has us believing that, for example, consumerism is good. Consumerism is good. What is if you turn on a television or look at your computer, what is the nature of the propaganda that you're receiving? Is the propaganda saying love your brother? When have you saw the last commercial that said love your brother? Except maybe in a pitch by one of these established churches that wants your donation. So consumerism is a conquest ideology that has overtaken our minds. And one of the key elements of American ideology is that business is good, that profit is the greatest good, that creating profits are going to produce social goods. And part of what the transformative power of the ideology is that, again, it makes the dirty look clean. It makes the violence look gone. One of the, we're experiencing right now in Detroit an example of conquest ideology, and everybody except the victims are celebrating. What is that? You have Dan Gilbert, you have Mr. Illich, you have the mayor, you have the governor, you have all the politicians saying, we have saved Detroit. We are creating a new Detroit. And it's coming not through the corrupt previous government that existed before that. It came through an emergency manager, political action by the governor, and the charity of the rich. That's the new Detroit that they see and are creating. I call it, in Walter's own conference, Future City Trophy Detroit, Future Trophy City Detroit. Why are they not sharing that's also right there in the open? Over 70,000 people evicted from their homes, 70,000 homes foreclosed on. How many people there is, I don't know. Over 40 or 50,000 people who had their water shut off. Their water shut off, living in what we now consider inhumane conditions in their own homes. That is conquest ideology, when you put a pretty picture on something that's terrible and it's celebrated and everybody says, hey, you're right on, let's keep on doing it. Okay, so let me see. One of the things about these conquest ideologies is that they're so pervasive. Because the 1% controls the system, they are expressed in national mission statements, in our laws, in rituals, in writings, art, monumental architecture, and all types of media. Again, we're inundated by them. Let me give you an example of how a different kind of conquest ideology works. One I've just given you by the consumer, by convincing you, that you are the chosen people, that you do deserve your material wealth, that you do deserve this. And I got to tell you, when I see those images of African children starving, like everybody else, I turn the pitch off and turn on to the next piece of news, because I don't want to be reminded about the state of the world outside America. But let me give you an example of how conquest ideologies work power relationship within society. And let me take an example, the way that a racist society is created. It can be broken down into very simple formulas, and maybe that's why only a select few are here, because I got simplistic solutions to what the issues are. Let's talk about racism as illustrated by, have any of you seen a documentary called A Class Divided by Jane Elliott? It was on PBS and many years ago, and when Martin Luther King was killed, her little class of white people in Iowa at the grammar school level went into crisis because they had just built an Indian teepee and they had declared Martin Luther King their hero of the month, and all of a sudden he's shot and killed. And the little white kids could not understand why Mr. King was killed. And she said, well, I could have explained it to them, but instead I showed it to them. And then she divided the class, and immediately, within one class period, created a racist society among homogeneous little white kids who are innocent, who love each other. They're treating each other as friends. They belong to one rural community. They have never seen a black person, and then they themselves are divided into little monsters. How did she do that? First of all, a conquest ideology requires an authority that can enforce its will with arms, beliefs, laws, and customs. If you don't have that central authority to enforce its will, then the game is open. Secondly, it divides the rulers and subjects into visible and distinct categories of identity that are marked with physical and cultural symbols so that they can be distinguished from each other. In the case of the Jews in Nazi land, they obviously had different religious beliefs, but they were so integrated into German society that they had to be marked by a yellow star. But you mark them. Then you assign values of superiority and inferiority to the groups in all conceivable categories of identity. You might use a few as handles, but they're thorough. Categories of identity of intelligence. They're not as intelligent as we are. Maybe they'll make it someday, but not now. Physical beauty. Physical beauty is a form of conquest. One of the greatest achievements of the African American civil rights movement, if the 1960s, was to break out of the mold that white is beautiful and that we have to conform to white standards of beauty, and to say black is beautiful. And so we are used to coding people by their physical appearances. We assign superiority and inferiority in terms of morality. They are less moral than we are. And of course, cultural norms. No, you don't eat your dinner that way, you do it this way. No, you don't speak that way, you speak that way. And so when you have especially elites who are highly bred into their elite culture, and that is a standard, then everybody below them is going to be inferior, but some groups are more inferior than others. The assigned valuations then are treated as inherent and immutable. The superior group cannot do anything wrong. Everything the inferior group does is wrong and defective by definition, even when it's apparently the opposite. One of our specialists that visited us on colorblind racism told us a story of an experience that he had at the Washington, D.C. Opera House. He was sitting in the opera house listening to an opera, and right beside him was a little old white lady, probably rich, and they're having a really good conversation. No discrimination on her part, everything is cool. But then sometime during the concert, walks in Condoleezza Rice, sits at the other side of the seating arrangement, and the little white lady blurts out, talking about the most powerful woman in the world, she's still an N person. You know what an N person
Yeah, we
is.
know
I mean,
what an N
I
person
cannot say it.
We know what an person
Because part of what the black movement did was say that we are appropriating that word, only we can use it when we want to use it, and no one who is not black can ever use it again without having their tongue cut off or being fired from their network job. So that's part of the, so the Conquest ideologies always have resistance, but that, you know, I'm looking at how do you establish one. The value system is then enforced by customs, laws, police, courts, and propaganda. For example, in the Spanish colonial system, all you had to do was pass a law that says no Native American can take part in a town government of a Spanish town. No Native American can carry, unless he's an elite, carry a firearm. No Native American, there's prohibited legislation. Then the groups are crystallized into tangible public identities and behaviors by the implementation of the social system. So once you have the laws and standards in place, you have to enforce them and force people to conform. So if an African American cannot move out of Detroit into a suburb without being suspect, you know, then they're saying, why are you living in Detroit? You know, why aren't you improving yourself, etc. And so you force people into positions that realize the prediction. And what happens is that the good and defective become mirror opposites of each other. The privileged are everything positive, the underprivileged are everything negative. Even the same actions taken by the two groups will have opposite meanings. If I'm an elite and I have a little gambling session at my house with a lot of drinking, a little bit of entertainment, well, hey, that's just us. We're just doing moral fun. You get a commoner, hey, let's go have a card game and let's drink, but they're acting out again, they should be working, they're not taking care of their families, etc. You can take almost literally any action that is debatable or neutral, have one group do it, that's positive, the other group, no, that's negative, by the very fact that their character gives the actions that negative. For example, what happened when blacks came up from the South and went into industry. And the doors of the factories were open to them because they were needed as workers, but then there was a hierarchy of labor established in which there were white jobs and black jobs. And so now the jobs become associated with blackness. I don't want that job, that's the N person's job. The very life activities of the untouchable group confirms the correctness and demerits of their place in society. A life of material powerlessness and poverty is proof of inferiority. The individual benefactors in the privileged group become enforcers of the discriminatory system holding society together. I don't have to remind you of the Ku Klux Klan or other actions, or I'll mention another one in a sense. Protests and actions of resistance by the inferior group further confirms their naturalized character as undisciplined, not thinking right, trying to change what is. If the laws themselves cannot enforce the system, the dominant population turns to informal mechanisms. Again, I mentioned lynching is an informal mechanism, but colorblind racism is another. Two families show up to apply for a loan at the bank. One is white, the other one is black. They both have exactly the same economic identities. The white gets the loan, the black does not. But the officer making the decision says it had nothing to do with race. It depended on the ability of that family to show me that they're reliable. So it's really a question of character. It's not a question of race, it's a question of character. That's the way that colorblind racism works. as I said, that's just an example. I want to stop here and give you a chance to tell me I'm all messed up, or debate, or contribute to the discussion. And I think I'll stop there.
I was curious about the documentary, Class Divided. I haven't seen it. I'll see if I can locate it.
Yeah, Google it. It has actually been used in classes. And it's called A Class Divided. It was put out by PBS, and it was right after or after Martin Luther King was assassinated, and it's out there. I got a copy myself when it was replayed some years ago on PBS.
Is it a DVD or a VHS?
Well, I burned it off the television on a DVD.
Oh, you burned it on DVD.
Yeah, so check PBS, they might have it.
Okay.
Well, it may have said stuff that you all agree with, in which case there is no discussion.
Yeah, that was.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is usually for you guys, but with everything happening with, because when there's a discussion about racism, classism, in cities like Detroit, you have like the players are usually the white people and the black majority that live here. But with everything happening with immigration laws, and I was in Southwest Detroit, I was eating food, and I just happened to read the newspaper, and they was talking about a tornado bus. Is it tornado or tornado?
Well, both.
Okay. How they're just swooping up people.
Yeah.
Illegally, of course.
Yeah.
So how does when you talk about black and white, most people are familiar with that.
How do Latinos fit in?
Yeah. How does the Latino community see themselves in this? Like, do they see it as, oh, this is our issue too, because or that's just their issue. We're not really. It doesn't really affect us. We're outside of it, or not.
Yeah,
affected.
that's a good question, because the Latino community, that's a homogenizing term, or Hispanic, and in fact, some Latinos call themselves Hispanic and consider it an insult. It could be called either Latino or Chicano or Boricua. They're Hispanic. Usually the Hispanics are in business or at the university. They're middle class. The social activists choose the other terms. But in terms of economic and legal situation, you have a long time Mexican and Latino population in Southwest Detroit that has been here for generations. So they're clearly American. Some of them have succeeded economically and have moved out and have separated themselves by class from those who remain. So now they're divided by a class system. And then what you have is that the immigrants are really a product of a world capitalist system that has devalued labor over the last couple of centuries, created Mexico into a dependent economic nation, and has forced Mexicans to come up here looking for jobs at the very same time that the American economy has changed. And well, in the agricultural fields, Mexicans were always doing that. But other service industries, blacks don't want to do that anymore. You know, even black people don't want to do that because they see themselves as American. The president of Mexico got himself in hot water when he said that Mexicans were doing jobs that even blacks didn't want to do, but that's the reality of the situation. And so now what happens is that in perfect synchronicity, what you have is the allowance and attraction of illegalized immigrants who are exploited for their labor. And some of them are maimed and killed, and on the job, they're mistreated. I can tell you a lot of cases. At the same time, so they're benefiting the American economy, but at the same time, they are demonized. They are stealing our resources, they're spending our taxes, they're applying for Social Security or health care or some other stuff. And Victor, you close that door? We got it. Victor was hoping to escape right away, and what you have is industry wants these immigrants no matter what, and they prefer them illegalized. These people are not illegal, they're illegalized because they can exploit them. They have the unwitting cooperation of nativist people who believe that they have to preserve their cultural norms against this cultural attack by invaders who will change America forever. So two groups that have one has their economic needs met, the other one has their emotional, ideological needs met, and then the immigrants are crunched. So what you have is really fugitive slaves running around Detroit in America, being victimized by all the society. And what you have is that because we still subscribe to the idea that we're a virtuous society, that we're a meritorious society, that I would not hurt anybody, we don't care if we have a Department of Homeland Security that is now an industry in itself, and during Obama's first 4 years, deported 2 million people. That meant how many million families, or how many thousands of families had to be broken up and physically moved out of the country back to wherever they came from, and everything that they had here was devastated. It has happened here, it's still going on here, and yet we go on with our lives as if this is an ordinary moral nation. So we have, and we don't want to talk about the barbarities of imprisoning all the black males, and again, we talk about the water shop and stuff. So, I mean, we're, in some sense, ideologies or these rosy views of the world, we need them ourselves at a personal level to protect our sanity. Because if we really faced what is going on, and one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that progress creates poverty. Profit creates poverty. Somebody has to be exploited. And so the industrial, technological progress of the modern world has created poverty throughout the world because they wiped out previously existing viable societies and made them dependent on the capitalist system of commerce. And so they have no option. Well, thank you for the question. Yeah.
I have a question that's kind of related to the last things you were saying about facing what's happening or going insane or protecting ourselves from going insane. I was wondering about the issue of resistance to this state of affairs. I mean, you were mentioning that indeed there are resistances happening at all levels all the time. And yet at the same time, when one takes into account the pervasiveness of this ideological basis for this whole system of exclusions and inequalities and injustices, the task can seem overwhelming. So I was wondering if you had some, not solutions, although if you have them, that would be great, but thoughts on the notion of resistance, and connected to resistance, what could effective resistance be or look like?
Yeah.
There's the connected question of what you could call reform versus revolution. At what point some of these institutions, at what point did you give up on some of them because there's results of to what degree can you still keep working within them, hoping to change them, while knowing that you're in fact sustaining an inherently unfair structure?
In fact, I had an advanced student in one of my classes accused me of being a hypocrite. You know, for attacking the system. He said, but you're making a buck out of it, you know, so you're a hypocrite. You know, why should we believe anything you're saying? And I'm saying, well, I can either attack it from the outside, I can protest around the fab and get my money from somewhere else, or I can get my money from the inside and attack it still. You know, I'm protected by, to some limited extent, the tenure system, and so I can most of the time say what I'm thinking, although a dean that took me out of my office for 6 months, said I was poison to the university and, you know, we should get rid of Cuello. So I mean, there is consequences. There are different there are thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of well-intentioned and effective small and even large organizations that are healing the poor, feeding them, taking care of distressed people and even distressed pets and plots of ground and whatever. But we're all dispersed. Everybody's got their little mission of what they want to save, and we're not in linkage with each other. And I don't think that cross-linkage is going to happen until things collapse so much that people have no choice. When you have, for example, we have had cases of that. The civil rights movement is the major one. Before that, the women's movement. Before that, the abolitionist movement. Right now, we have a few movements like Occupy Wall Street. So there's some movements like that. There was a movement at a college in New York that the founder set up a system of tuition-free education, and then the administration screwed up the funding sources, and then you started charging tuition, and they occupied the school and tried to carry on a movement. So these movements are not going to get anywhere because they're addressing, it is like putting your finger in one of the holes in the dike, but there's 10 other holes there, and you don't have enough people to cover it, and no one's thinking, how do we build a new wall? Everybody's just trying to band-aid. So I think it's going to have, I believe that we're in systemic crises. I don't know if there will be a collapse or not, but just look at higher education and what's happened to it. Wayne State is now a private institution in terms of revenue. 75% of our revenue comes from tuition. That's radically different than when I went to school and the state paid for my education. Look at the corporate model we're going to at Wayne, in which economics is driving decisions that should be made by the academy, and in which we are producing propaganda-type programs that look good, and we've been doing this for decades, that look good, but actually are no effect. For example, in dealing with the issue of problems that come to us of students that are not well prepared, we have gone through so many programs of mentorship, this and that, you name it, that Wayne State finally decided, you know what, those don't work, let's just eliminate them all and get down to basic tasks. Can the student survive by himself or not? And so that's when that resistance will happen. If we, you know, I'm really serious about the ecological crisis. I organize my courses around, I say, I'm going to show you how the history of Mexico can explain how we got to the ecological crisis today and the capitalist crisis today. But there's one alternate view, and some would say it's an escapist point of view, but it's a spiritual point of view. You know, that you have to have faith in something greater, and that you adopt the principle of every great religion. And indeed, I dared to ask my students, what is the highest value that the human species has ever achieved? What is the highest, and I have to say moral value, because when I asked the question the first time, somebody said making money. So, you know, it's not, no, I'm sorry, moral value, moral, you know, something to guide your life with, to give you purpose. And the answer, of course, is love. And oh, well, that's impractical. No, because what does love your brother mean? It means treat your fellow humans with respect. Do not cheat them. Do not lie to them. Cooperate with them to build something constructive. So, I mean, you could go on forever on that line of thought, but those are only the two alternatives. I do not see the system fixing itself, because there are too many profiteers involved in what we call catastrophe. Then you put out economics, catastrophe, university, catastrophe. You know, there are too many people making a buck of the continuation of the corrupt system to really turn it around. What's happening at Wayne, however, to just end this statement, is that we at once thought that we were at 32,000 students, you know, 8 or 10 years ago, and the administration said, we want 40. So they went on a failed program to get us 40, it collapsed. Now we're down to 28. We've done a reversal. Why is that? Because of the cost of education, and because I see it in my classes all the time, the students are super burdened by their economic and work schedules that they're collapsing. They're not learning in the classroom. Yet we pretend that something good is happening. Sorry for the bad news, but I am an optimist. I am an optimist. I think, the human species has gone through so many things that we have to survive. At least some of us will. Maybe not all. I just don't want to be one of the losers.
The notion of resistance and, put that against the notion of conquest ideologies is sort of one force balancing the other, or one is a reaction to the other, or at least resistance is a reaction to conquest ideology. I'm wondering if you just say a couple words about how you think of the forces that you're talking about are outcomes of evolutionary processes. Are there generalities? You seem to be talking in some generalities that there are such things as conquest ideologies, so that seems to be something we could put in a category and say this is what we do as a species. So I was wondering if you could say something about how you think these forces evolve over the long term, because I'm an archaeologist.
I know, and you have shared a very important article with me. First of all, the categories I'm using, the 5 categories, they're conceptual categories. Like the old kings did not say, oh, we're going to do a conquest ideology now, or we're going to misapply technology, where they didn't make these decisions with that level of consciousness, but they did make decisions. And what I'm saying is that, and I agree with the article you lent me, but through my own conclusions, is that it looks like wherever there is surplus energy in a human society above the hunter-gathering level, there emerges a small group to take control of that surplus energy for its benefit, and eventually that unequal relationship becomes a power game in which they find through, for example, who were our first elites? There were 2 types. One was the religious elite who used ideology or their position with the other world to guide us, and they could be benign. But then the warrior elite, we have to have defense against the enemy, and you have real violence at the hunter-gathering stage in some societies, violence that proportionally approximate to what happens when the lords and the kings and the high church leaders take over society and create war. So what I'm saying is that what is the ultimate origin of it is, I think it's genetic, a genetic
Predilection.
deformation. We all are selfish to some extent. We all want to survive. We all want to live. We all want to be happy. But some of us have that sense of need much greater. It can only be satisfied by gaining power over other people. And then once you get those individuals acting out, then they create what I call cultural 1%ers. I can raise my kid to be greedy. I can raise my kid to think that he should rule the world. I can raise my kid to believe that people of a different color are inferior. I can brainwash them, and because I believe this is right. And these people, one of the incredible things that has happened over human history is that the people who invent the lies come to believe the lies because it justifies their way of doing things. And there's the chance for changing their mentality is almost zero unless they go through a catharsis like Paul went when God appeared to him and said, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. We would all have to get on our horse, a metaphorical horse, and have God appear to us in order for us to convert into good, giving Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims.
I can't help but think that at some point you're going to have to incorporate the notion of identity and ethnicity and ethnogenesis into this theory, because it works pretty well if in these generalities to talk about the the benefits to a certain small
Yeah.
percentage of people of these invidious distinctions and inequalities, et cetera, in very large complex systems, large societies. And, you know, they got started about 5,000 years ago, but they've really taken on different proportions in the last 500 years with the kind of the birth of capitalism and the
Yeah.
extension of globalism.
It's been an
But-
explosion, yeah.
But ethnogenesis seems, in the distinction between ethnic groups, the distinction between types of people, that comes from what? It comes from conflict between groups. We wouldn't have ethnogenesis unless we had
It comes from the
something
need, yeah.
different, you know?
It comes from the need to have social cohesion to survive, and it comes from, for example, what we consider mythology of the Native Americans or other initial groups. We consider that mumbo jumbo. There wasn't mumbo jumbo. It was a finely thought out ideology of social control that says the principle of reciprocity is what governs us. We must give to each other, you must give to the whole, you are all related, and then we must give to nature, we must protect it because it gives us life. Now, there were a lot of violations of those principles, and people did hunt out some animals and stuff, but it's really how do we keep the families and the larger families united? That's what a band, even a tribe, and a chiefdom are. How do we keep unity? But then when you have different ones of these, it is highly useful to see the other as not. So there are, for example, I believe that there were societies that were very peaceful at the hunting and gathering stage, maybe isolated ones, but certainly someone has done a study of predatory pre-contact groups in the tropics in the Americas and concluded that Conquest ideology, he doesn't use this, but he pretty much says it, that started at that level. Because what would happen is that one little group of agriculturalists who also hunted but had prime warriors would go raid another group for economic benefit, but they would put it in terms of spiritual benefit. We're balancing and deriving spiritual life from the human trophies we take and what they symbolize, and then they would enslave members of that group. How can you do that? Well, their ideological perspective was those people are wild. They're like wild animals. We are civilized. This is at the basic agricultural tribal group, you know, not a state. Those people are inferior to us culturally and morally, and we will first break their identities down, their ethnic identities down, break them down by brutality, and then we reconstruct their identities as part of our society, but their position is going to be inferior to us, and they were treated as pets. So, I mean, that's before you get the rights of the state, that's at the basic tribal level. So, I mean, that's why I'm saying that's where the origins are. So, that's a good question. We'll have to continue it more, and I'll have to integrate that more into it.
I was curious. I was thinking about the Islamic people, you know, like the ones in Dearborn, they're more well-to-do than the ones in Hamtramck. And I was,
Yeah.
and I was wondering, are you familiar with whether or not there's any cultural bias between the two of them, as the two different groups? I mean, because there's such a vast financial difference.
It's not simply financial. Is that I think in Hamtramck there's a lot of Yemeni.
Yes.
And you know, I mean, there's so many differences among the Middle Eastern groups. You know, there's Chaldean, there's Muslims. There's two major branches of Muslims. I think a lot of it depends on individual family wealth and stuff. So no, I couldn't answer your question any more than that about whether they, you know, what kind of relations
Well,
they
they
have.
interact with one another.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've spread myself out so thinly with my ideas that I can't stop to do specific granular research to prove my case.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I got to get to class.